Let us offer our consecration to the Lord. Lord, we offer up to you this day, and we ask that we may glorify your name as you call us to glorify you. Let us always be your servants, especially as we learn more and more of the origins of the people you brought to this earth, the chosen people, the Jews, who later brought forth those of us who are Christian. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Well, today's story is a fascinating story. Yesterday, I taught you actually more about coming back to the church and everything else. But I want to talk to you about this fascinating story about the children of Isaac. The grandchildren of Isaac, the children of Jacob, who later becomes Israel. So these are the 12 sons of Jacob, who later form the 12 tribes of Israel. So this is the first time we actually see the name Judah, which later becomes the southern country of the two countries after the time of Solomon. So let us go back. What happens is they become very jealous of one of their brothers, the youngest, who is Joseph, and so they basically sell him in an interesting way to a group of people who end up sending him to the Egyptians, basically selling him to the Egyptians. But when Joseph, who is now in Egypt, besides being lost to his family, but he becomes a great asset to the Egyptians and essentially becomes a member of the governing force of Egypt, actually becomes a governor there. And so now the other brothers have to go home to Israel, formerly known as Jacob, and tell them, we kind of lost Joseph. The animals must have got him. Well, what happens is there's a great famine, and now it kind of like, think of it like oil today. Now they have to go back to Egypt to get grain. And to make a long story short, Joseph, the son who is sold into slavery in Egypt, into Egypt, not necessarily slavery, sold into Egypt. He's now again a major authority in Egypt, and he recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. So he has a little fun with them. So, I can give you grain, but you need to find your youngest brother. Somewhere along the line, I think there's another brother there. So he knows exactly who they are. They don't know who he is. So now they're like, what are we going to do? We sold off our younger brother, and we can't have grain. And they go back to the father, and basically who is Israel, and the father sends them back down, and they go back down. And Joseph is just having a lot of fun with them. Oh, really? Well, I need this other brother here. And basically, to make a long story short, they really are very remorseful of what they've done and, terrible thing they have done. And it's at that point that Joseph reveals he is their lost brother. And they have this great reunion. But what this begins is the beginning of the people who are the chosen people who now are in Egypt. Now we know what happens there, because they become these great allies of the Egyptians. They become people who are living among the Egyptians, and so we can see where this is going. But we can also see something here too as well. The 12 brothers, who are the 12 sons of Jacob, also known as Israel, become the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel. These are where the 12 tribes come from. And so if you look up the name of the brothers, you're going to see the tribes. And you're going to see Benjamin, you're going to see Dan, you're going to see Reuben, all the way down the line. So that's where this begins, and you're going to see the brother named Judah, which later becomes the name of the southern kingdom. So they are still called Hebrews at this time. They're not called Jews, because they're not going to be called Jews until Judah is formed, and this is what we have here. So now the people are among the Egyptians, and they have a well-established place. But as I should say, that if you know the story of the Ten Commandments, you can see where this is going. And so this is where everything begins. But notice something else. By virtue of the fact that they are now going down to Egypt because of the famine, and then they start going down to Egypt, they are not on the land. And this sets them up for being returned to the land, which we see in about 400 years with the story of the Ten Commandments. But at the same time, what is it, the saying, nature abhors a vacuum. When they leave Egypt, when they leave the Promised Land, then that becomes an empty space that gets filled with the Canaanites and these other tribes, and so they have to retake this Promised Land, which is well into the future. But that's part of what we're looking at, and this is all how this is set up. We'll talk in a minute. Don't forget to tell others where they can find our program. You can hear us on WEZE 590 AM and WEZEradio.com at midnight and 3 o'clock in the morning, Monday through Friday, Eastern Time. We then podcast the program on your favorite podcast platform and at CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. You can also hear us on our parish website, ST for StAnthonyAlston.org. That's StAnthonyAlston.org. And let others know where they can find us and spread the word and subscribe to our podcast. Yeah, and let other people know where they can find some of our material and our podcast and everything else. And definitely spread the word. And, when I hear this every so often, people say, hey, I'm looking for a good Catholic podcast. Now, you probably realize that this podcast and the other one are not really of the same style that you find in some of the more prominent podcasts. And the reason is because I am a parish priest. And parish priests, what we're called to do is take everything that is what the church teaches and bring it down to a level that people can understand. That doesn't mean, as the saying goes, and pardon me for using the saying, dumb it down. It means to bring it to the level to where it actually originates on the human level. That's what we're called to do. Many other podcasts, and I'm not trying to say this like, we have better laundry detergent than they do. I mean it more as a fact is there are other podcasts that really focus a lot on the black and white of what the church teaches, where I'm trying to bring the more human factor of the more reality. This is the way it is in the real world. And that's what I try to do. So that's why this podcast is different than many of the others, because I'm coming from the perspective of someone who works in a parish, who's surrounded by Harvard University and Boston University, and Boston College is just down the street. Leslie is just up the street, and so many other colleges. Plus, the people who live here, the regular Joes who live here, the regular Janes who live there, and also the Brazilians, so we could say the regular Jose and Marias who live here, and everyone else. This is what I do, is bring all of that into the way that we can understand it here on the podcast. So I bring a more... I bring less these are the rules and more let's come to experience God as he truly is. So that's where you're going to find this podcast. So a lot of the people know where you can find this. So anyway, one of the things that we see here is now we're starting to see the beginning of the 12 tribes of Israel, but we're seeing that the people, this is the beginning of the Hebrews being off the land and coming into Egypt. And we start to see this is the real beginning of the real intense history of the people we now call the Jews. And remember, I use that term because at this time they are not called the Jews. They are a lot of people refer to them as the Hebrews, and we're going to see that in the book of Exodus. So we see this whole aspect, and what is the focus? It's right now in the background, but what is the focus? The land. And always keep that in mind. When it comes to looking at Jewish history, the land is key. The land that God gives to Abraham, that is inherited by Isaac, that is inherited by Jacob, who later becomes Israel. This land becomes key to the Jewish people. And remember something else. They are the monotheistic people. All the cultures around them are polytheistic, and all their gods are human. They're not human. That doesn't make any sense. So I'm sorry, I goofed on that. All their gods are a human image of their gods, whereas we're called to understand God as beyond that human image. Remember, the Jews to this day do not say the name of God. They don't write the name of God. You can tell right away when a Jew writes something about God, because you will see G-D. They don't say his name. They don't write his name because God is so holy, his name cannot even be written. But one of the reasons for that is that image of God. We cannot make an accurate image of God with our human mind. That's really the other side of that same teaching. So that's who we're dealing with, people who are surrounded by cultures that have this human image of their own gods, and this group that understands who God is but knows he is beyond their imagination. We'll talk more tomorrow. I want to call your attention to Catholic TV, which offers great faith-filled, family-friendly programming 24 hours a day. You can find your cable channel at www.getcatholictv.com, and you can watch online on the free apps or check out the YouTube channel. Daily Mass, Rosaries, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Novena are all available online and on demand. Check out CatholicTV.com. If you would like to support our program, please consider a donation to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. There are several ways to consider this. One is to purchase any of our merchandise, which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. There are coffee mugs there. There's also my latest book, Encounter Christ in Your Humanity, all of which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. You can also donate to the show directly through either the Donate tab, also at CatholicAudiomedia.com, or by sending a donation through the U.S. Postal Service with your questions and comments at 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. That's St. Anthony Parish, 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. Finally, the best way you can support our parish is to attend Mass on Sundays at 10 o'clock and be a part of our parish. We thank you for any support you would like to give to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts, the sponsoring parish for this media outreach to Catholics and other Christians in the WROL, WEZE, and podcast listening audience. In Cristo vivimos.